All right, so it's 10:16, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. If people wander in, and that is just fine. But this is Wayland Smalley. He is from over in the Foyle area.
Yes.
And so he has been a homesteader. He gets into all kinds of things when it comes to homesteading and gardening. But he's going to come and talk to us today about heat mulch gardening. I have started tiptoeing into it, and I probably did it all wrong, so I'm really interested in what he has to say to make sure I can do it correctly. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. This is great. Gardening. How much of your garden is taken up by weeds? Okay. I grew up tilling, I grew up hoeing, I grew up pulling weeds in Wyoming, which was a high desert, and Grandpa had a small little 5-acre truck garden, and he thought that the grandkids ought to learn how to garden by doing that. And I swore I would never garden again. I was like, I'm not doing this. So some 50 years later, I'm in the garden. We're growing a few things, and my wife and I felt better when we ate the food that we grew ourselves. And one afternoon, it's a Saturday, I'm down on my hands and knees, and I'm pulling weeds. And I'm cussing, and I'm dripping sweat. You know, it's a beautiful day like today, Oklahoma, about 80 degrees, 100% humidity. I reached down, and I got a steak. And I broke my best tomato, I stepped on a zucchini, there's got to be a better way. I do not want to weed anymore, but I also want to grow my own food, because as everybody here knows, you know, a tomato's a great example. When you get in the store, it's not what you can grow yourself. So, my background is in continuous improvement. I always questioned, is there a better way to do things? So I started doing some research. And 6 years ago, there really wasn't a whole lot out there about weed control. Yes, you can buy stuff, that green, you can put that down, the pre-emergence. I didn't want any chemicals. That was the whole point. I wanted to grow my own stuff, but I didn't want to weed anymore. So I stumbled across a lady called Bruce Stout, and her method was she just threw hay on, she'd just throw seeds down, and she just put hay on stuff, and it grew. And that's, of course, I had to look into it. I'm like, it can't be that simple. It just cannot be that simple. So I did a little more research, and then I ran across Back to Eden, which is all wood chips, and then Google culture, which is logs, and it's kind of like a lasagna garden where you put logs and then hay and then leaves, and so you kind of make layers like a lasagna. And I started seeing all of these, but nobody really explained much of anything. Then I came across the leaf mold, and here in Oklahoma, if you've got trees, you've got leaves, and I have to rake anyhow, and I thought, well, we're going to give this a shot. And I grew up, you know, tilling and hoeing, and this is as far from where I started as you could get. So that year, I started gathering all the leaves, and instead of putting them in bags and making a big burning pile and whatnot, I just started putting them where the garden was. And I mean, I put them down like that thick. They say 4 inches thick, but I just wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow, and it took me a little while to get it all covered up. And it looked like something you just want to go drop a match on and burn off. You know, it was. I was like, but I'm going to try this. I have no idea if this is going to work or not. Come spring, they said plant in the mulch. This is how weird I was. I'm like, okay. So I pull the leaves back. I'm like, there's nothing to plant in here. I couldn't figure this out. So I did some more research. It's like, no, you pull it back and you plant in the soil. That summer, we had no weeds. And I was like, well, okay. Soil still hadn't amended very well, but we had no weeds. And I'm like, this is what I was shooting for, no weeds. All right, I've always kind of been able to grow stuff a little bit, you know, adding fertilizers, doing whatever we could do. I was putting water on, not getting enough rain, getting too much rain. The tilled up dirt gets soggy, then it turns into a brick. You know, we've all done the same thing. But my goal was no weeds, and I had no weeds. And this was awesome. Okay, we're on the right path. But by the end of the summer, the leaves were almost gone. But the soil was doing pretty good, and I'd had some pretty good squash. I think we had some pretty good tomatoes that year. Things were like, okay, this will kind of work a little bit. So then doing more research throughout that whole time, I was taking a little bit from everybody that I found, and there was just a few people. But then I ran across a guy in New Jersey that liked to do wood chips, and he just he layered that on, and he talked about going down the soil and the whole thing there. So they were cutting the lines, and VEC, the electric company, had wood chip trucks, and I said, can you drop some off? So they did. I couldn't get enough of any one thing to cover the whole garden, so I just started mixing it all together. I thought, this is organic, this would be good. The next year, planted into the dirt started to become good enough that we could plant in, and there's this year where we planted these sweet potatoes. All right, and the slips into the ground, mulched up back around them. This right here is an example of later that year when we harvested. You could have knocked me over with the feather. That's a 6 pound, that's actually a 6.5 pound sweet potato. I've never seen anything that big in the store in my life. This thing come out of the ground, and we still had no weeds. Now, like, okay, we're on the right track. Now, like, why is this working? I haven't put down any fertilizer. I barely put any water down. When you pull that mulch back, you can kind of see the color of this soil underneath here. It's a rich, dark, it's moist. Now, like, I stumbled across a professor that had done some microbiology studies. Turns out that the bacteria and the fungus in the soil breaks down the parts of the dirt and brings all that nutrients right there at the root zone for your plants. So then I got to work like, okay, I got to figure this whole thing out. The garden is basically dirt, water, the sun, and seeds, right? That's what your garden is. But what is dirt? You can buy different bags of dirt. You go to the store. What is dirt? Well, dirt, basically, if you've ever seen the soil triangle, sand, silt, and clay, different sized pieces of rock. Rock is what makes up the earth. Your plants need 42 different minerals. All 42 minerals are in that clay, sand, and silt. The bacteria and the fungus, they eat that. They make little enzymes which break that down. And then the little bigger micro critters come by and eat them, and then they do their business, and they make all of that nutrients plant soluble. That all happens right around the roots. I always thought that the roots held the soil together. The microbiology holds the soil together for the roots to grow into. So now all of a sudden I'm figuring out why some of this is working. You get a huge rainstorm, I could go out there and walk on it. I could go out there and pick, harvest. It didn't matter. My old garden, when I tilled it up, you get a good rainstorm, you go knee deep. You know, it turns into a sloggy mess. So all of that is because of the life in the soil, and that's where the deep mulch keeps it covered. It helps bring in that bacteria and fungus. It helps feed those microbes. It helps feed your plants. So the better the soil, the better the plants. The better the plants, the better the harvest.
So you said started out with the leaves.
Yes.
And then you put the mulch on top of that.
Well, I use the leaves as a mulch.
I meant the wood chips.
Yes.
Okay.
And so what I do now is this is my secret recipe. Don't tell anybody. Okay. I take a little bit of whatever I get my hands on, and I mix it in with whatever I get my hands on, and put some more of whatever I get my hands on. Okay, the basic materials that we use, leaves we have a lot of, so we use a lot of leaves. Whenever you mow, I take just grass clippings to put out there. The neighbor who doesn't spray because he's too cheap to spray, I know because of the weeds in his hay, but I get a bale or two of ground bale from him every year, and we put that on there.
Hay, not straw?
Both.
Okay.
If I can get straw, I use that. We just mix it all together. But you want to have it, when I put it down at least a foot, maybe a little bit thicker, because it breaks down very quickly. The worms that it attracts, goes through that stuff very, very fast. You'll be surprised. If you're gonna do this kind of method, overdo it, and you're not doing it enough. That's what I found. It's just amazing how fast this stuff just disappears. You have to continually do it, you have to continually add to it. But if you mix it together, it's fun. I've been accused of robbing nitrogen out of my soil. Not on top. It breaks down different. You can use manures, you can use rabbit manures out of your hutch, your chicken manures when you clean it up. As long as it lays on top, you're not biting up the nitrogen, because it does take nitrogen to break it down if you till it in or if you shovel it in. So as long as it's on top, it's just acting as a cover. A couple benefits of that: it keeps the temperature moderated. So in the winter, it doesn't freeze, and well, especially here, more north, I'm sure it would. But in the summer, it doesn't get really, really hot. And as long as you keep your soil around 75 to 80 degrees, you're going to be able to grow whatever. So, you know, when the sun's really blistering down in the middle of the summer, because we got the hot months coming up, and it's going to get really hot. If you have the mulch down, the soil, which is around the roots, keeps that where that plant can tolerate the sun beating down on it. We had tomatoes grow all year last year. Until it frosted, we were harvesting tomatoes off of every tomato plant that we had. And I've got a whole thing on how we trellis and up and everything, but the whole basis is in that deep mulch where the microbes takes and feeds the plants. So it is just a mixture of whatever. Here's another thing you can use. We take any of the junk mail that comes in, we take and run it through a shredder, and then when we vacuum, because we got our dog, which is not shown here, but he sheds everywhere. And we vacuum that up, and we mix that in, and we just lay it on all our kitchen scraps. Some guys will talk about digging that in, but that takes the nitrogen out to break that down. We just put it on top and cover it up with leaves or chips or straw or whatever. So it's all just mixing together. Then we put when we shred the paper, we put that in the grocery bag. We put the grocery bag down there too, and let that break down, because it's just this brown paper pulp. Come on, let's plant.
Let's go plant garden.